Hey there. Episode 2 hype, looking at basic animations. Best way to learn how things happen and how much control you have over the animations is to get into it. I'm going to show you how a basic animation happens. So we need an element and we'll make it move, and then we're going to look a little more closely at the timeline itself, because that's where the nitty-gritty control are going to give you the most problems. We need something on the stage. In the first video I showed you that we use elements. Now I also described that you can use Illustrator to create your elements and copy and paste, and that's entirely possible as well. But for efficiency's sake here, we'll just grab a rectangle. Hype always puts things smack dab in the middle, and that's fine once you grab them and move them around. Like other vector programs, they act like vectors, and double clicking gives you some other controls, but for now let's just get this moving. I may not like a gray box. In that instance, I'm going to reach over into the inspector panel. I'm going to find the element controls. Here it says background, and I'm just going to click. We have a variety of ways to look or choose colors, and I'm just going to give it a red, big red box. I can change the border. I think I'll choose blue. How about that? And the width, just bump that up. Okay, got a red box with a blue border. How do we move it? We drag it. Yeah, we want the animation to happen. Remember, the basic description for animation is movement over time. Now, in Hype, which is a little bit different than other programs, you select the element, and there's a magic red button down here. It's your play button, or your record button, I'm sorry. You hit record. You'd imagine that you would move it and think that it's going to record the movement, but it will not. You need to identify the period or the time for that movement, and then you move it. Oh, back up. I didn't have the record button on. Hit record. Define the time. Move the object. What we're seeing is the motion path for that object. Let's turn off the record button. Get back to 0. This is the first animation. Let's review that again. I'll back up a bit here. Motion timeline to 0. Hit the record button. Set the period of time. Move the object. Turn off the recording. And that's it. Let's ask for another element. We'll try it twice. Polygon, right in the middle. It picked up those colors. I don't think I want. So let's see. What do we have here? Different color. Different color. Select the object. Hit the record button. This is at 3 seconds again. Move the object. We're going to move it down here. Stop the record. Go back to the beginning. And we have movements, both of them. Easy peasy. What we see down below in the timeline is important for us now. When I click the motion, or when I click the animation blue bar, down below in the properties, we see that the origin left and the origin top, indicating the placement of the object, are now highlighted. There are other changes you can can spec for the objects and think about the different ways that we can create contrasts, which will give you an idea of how many changes you can make the elements here. You can change the color of the element, you can change the position, which we've seen, you can change the size of the elements, you can change the opacity of the elements, you can give shadows on the elements. There's a whole variety of changes that we can make to these elements, and let's try one or two. I'm going to turn off the polygon, just for simplicity. And now you can either select the object on the stage, or you can select the object in the timeline, and they will light up. Up above in the inspector panel, we can see that there's an opacity control. In the metrics panel, there is a rotation control. There is a scale control. Let's try some of those changes as well and see what happens. So at the beginning, I can hit record because we want the changes to record. I'll set the period, and then I'm going to change the opacity. Let's do that. It becomes invisible. Stop recording, go back to the beginning. There are two changes happening, the position and the opacity. So let's if we look down below in the properties, the opacity property is now added to our stack. Every time you change a characteristic of an element in the animation, it appears in properties. And if you look below, the diamonds at each end of the animation indicate keyframes. Keyframes are changes in animation. So the opacity property moves from one point to the other point. You can add keyframes with the keys here. Let's try that. So I'm going to move halfway into the animation, and I'm going to add a keyframe to properties, or to the opacity property. Bingo. And then here in opacity, I'm going to move that to 0. Move. Now, because both of those keyframes had the same relative opacity, I'm going to move this back up to 100, and you can see that the animation has filled in. Let's go back to 0, and we'll hit play. All of an element's controls are visible and fairly movable as well. So there's your first animation. The first animation. Timeline controls. But wait, there's more. These are movable. You can copy and paste in animation, a blue bar, call it, from one element to the next. I'll light up the polygon and we'll see what's happened here. The period for the polygon was simply delayed on our timeline. So your first assignment will be fairly simple. I'm only going to ask you for the most basic animations for a couple of elements. Beyond that, we'll get into things more complex. Introduction to animation. Try it. Let me know how it works.